So what's the relevance of this? People say, okay, big deal. So you tell me a low FCI, high FCI. So we looked at about 1.5 million animals in the DRMS database and broke it out by 10 FCI increments. So we went from less than 70, so those cows were actually underperforming, to animals over 130. So they did way better than what we predicted they would do. So what did we see as a difference? One, on first lactation cows, the culling rates on those animals from less than 70 all the way up to over 130 reduced. So you can see here we went from 26.7% culling rate on those animals in their lactation down to 23.2. So less of those animals would get culled later in that lactation. Peak milk, huge difference, 69 pounds versus 94 pounds. So although we're looking at 5 to 40 days in milk, we can already tell that those animals that had a really good start will produce more at peak milk. And when you look at the completed lactation at 305 days, so you can see those animals that did really well at the start produced over almost 7,000 pounds more milk throughout the rest of that lactation. So that's on first lactation animals. When you then look at your later lactation animals, the differences are even more pronounced. So the culling rates are a little bit higher, obviously, on older cows, but there's almost a 4%, a little bit over 4% difference with the cows that had a poor start versus those that did really well. The peak milk, you're almost talking about 40-pound difference. So, and then as far as the total lactation, we're looking at 23,000 up to 32, so even bigger difference of almost 9,000 pounds of milk more throughout the rest of that lactations for those cows that started out really well. So we can tell that that FCI value has a lot of predictive value for the rest of that lactation. So what sets this measure apart from other measures that are out there? I mean, some people just look at the first test, their milk yield, on a fresh cow and say, okay, we pick the low ones, the high ones. Well, what went into the model is that the data represents all regions of the United States. It wasn't just built based on Midwest data or Northeast data. It was data that was used from all across the US. As I mentioned, that's a lot of data. So we used 1 million first lactation records and 2 million older lactation cows to come up with this predictive model. It works for first and older lactation cows. Most people would think, well, if all I can use it for is older lactation cows, what about my heifers? Because that's where a lot of decisions are made if that animal's going to continue in the herd or not. And what's really neat about this was that it uses genetic data, it uses obviously production data, it also uses reproduction data and calving information to come up with this prediction. So that's, as far as we know, the most inclusive set of data that we have to calculate or develop this formula to predict the cow's future energy corrected milk. And then, we know there's farms out there that are not paid on energy corrected milk, so there is a version that looks at milk only as well. So if you don't have components on your animals, we can still calculate this using the milk value only.